There is a silence that most people fear, the kind of silence that comes when you're alone, not just in a room, but in your path, in your mind, in your life. But solitude is not weakness, it is training. It is refinement. A woman who thrives without friends is not bitter, she is not broken, she is becoming, because when there is no one to lean on, you learn to stand taller. When there is no applause, you learn to validate your own soul. And when the world goes quiet, you hear your own voice louder. You do not need a crowd to become powerful. You do not need approval to be valuable. You do not need company to know your worth. When a woman learns to walk alone, truly alone, without needing, without chasing, without explaining, something unstoppable awakens inside her. This is not the path of many, it is the path of warriors. And that is what you are becoming. Solitude is a state many try to escape from, but for the woman who chooses it, or is forced into it, it becomes her teacher. It is in the stillness of solitude that noise clears, and what remains is the raw truth of who she is. Without distractions, without others to mirror her thoughts, she begins to hear the voice that had long been buried beneath expectations, opinions, and societal noise. This voice is her own, and it carries both the pain of the past and the strength of her becoming. In solitude, she is no longer performing. She is not adjusting her energy to fit the room. She is not filtering her truth to avoid discomfort. She is simply existing, and in that existence, something pure begins to rise. Every morning she wakes up alone, but in that aloneness is a quiet rhythm that no one else can interrupt. She begins to see that the routines she builds, the discipline she commits to, and the inner conversations she has are no longer shaped by the need to impress or the fear of being misunderstood. Her silence becomes her sanctuary, and slowly the silence becomes louder than any crowd ever could. She finds clarity in the spaces most people avoid. The corners of her mind that once felt empty now begin to fill with presence. It is not the presence of others, but the presence of purpose, of focus, of vision. In solitude, the woman begins to understand her triggers. She becomes aware of the emotions that rise without explanation. The sadness, the anger, the waves of doubt. She faces them all without escape. But instead of running, she remains, and as she remains, she transforms. Pain becomes wisdom, fear becomes alertness, doubt becomes questioning. Every emotion that once ruled her becomes a message, not a master. Without the voices of friends to comfort or distract her, she must become her own comfort. She must become her own guide. This responsibility might feel heavy at first, but over time it turns into empowerment. She no longer looks outward for answers. She learns to sit with the discomfort until it teaches her what it came to show. The discipline that is born in solitude is unmatched. While others rely on external accountability, she learns to hold herself to standards that no one else sees. She trains her mind the way a warrior trains her body. Every day, she sharpens her focus. Every day, she strengthens her boundaries. Every day, she repeats rituals that remind her who she is becoming. And she does it not because someone is watching, but because no one is. That is the essence of true discipline, doing what must be done even when there is no applause, no reward, no audience. Solitude reveals patterns that were previously hidden. Without others around, she begins to see her own habits, her own self, sabotage her own light. She can no longer blame, project, or avoid. This confrontation is not easy, but it is necessary. Growth begins when excuses end. In the mirror of solitude, she sees not only the woman she has been, but the woman she has the potential to become. And in seeing this, she accepts the weight of that responsibility. She begins to act not from impulse, but from intention. Her world becomes more still, but never stagnant. In that stillness, new things are born, ideas, clarity, peace. The noise that once surrounded her, the opinions of others, the pressure to conform, the need to belong, loses its grip. She realizes that belonging to herself is more powerful than being accepted by a group. The solitude she once feared becomes her foundation, and from that foundation she rises, stronger, clearer, more focused. Her time alone becomes not a gap in her life, but the very place where she forges her identity. Others may not understand her. They may mistake her solitude for sadness, but what they cannot see is the internal transformation taking place. The woman in solitude is not isolated. She is immersed in growth, in learning, in becoming. She studies herself the way a monk studies the mind. She learns when to rest and when to push. She learns that emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent definitions. And above all, she learns that her worth was never tied to who stood beside her, but to the unshakable essence that lives within her. True confidence is not built in the spotlight, and it does not require a crowd. It is born in the moments when no one is watching, when no one is clapping, when no one is there to affirm that you are enough. A woman who walks this path begins to understand that confidence is not a performance, but a presence. It is not loud or boastful. It is quiet, rooted, and undeniable. It comes from doing the hard inner work without seeking validation. When she no longer waits for the approval of friends or the reassurance of others, she begins to anchor her self-worth in something deeper, her own truth. This kind of confidence cannot be taken, because it was never borrowed from someone else. It was built, earned, and lived. The world often teaches women to be likable, to be agreeable, to fit in. But fitting in is not the same as standing strong. True confidence means she stops shrinking to make others comfortable. She no longer softens her voice to avoid being judged. She speaks with clarity, not to provoke, but because she has stopped fearing how she will be received. She no longer dilutes her dreams to match the pace of others. She moves forward at her own rhythm, whether anyone notices or not. This internal certainty is not arrogance, it is alignment, and alignment is stronger than image. It doesn't require decoration or validation because it is built on lived experience and tested values. When confidence is forged in silence, it becomes unshakable. She learns that what she believes about herself matters more than what anyone else thinks. She stops seeking consensus before making a decision. She trusts her intuition because she has listened to it in solitude. She has failed alone, healed alone, and grown alone. That kind of journey doesn't produce temporary courage. It builds a foundation that holds firm when the storms come. When criticism arises, or when people withdraw, she no longer wavers. She understands that people's opinions change like the wind, but her direction must remain rooted in her values. In the absence of friendship, she also learns a powerful lesson, that love and support must start from within. She begins to offer herself the patience, understanding, and encouragement she once searched for in others. The confidence she builds is not dependent on compliments or comparisons. It is the kind of quiet knowing that doesn't need to prove anything. She becomes the one who claps for herself, the one who keeps going when no one says well done. Because in the stillness, she has learned that the greatest validation comes not from the outside world, but from inner peace and self-respect. Without the distraction of constant social interaction, she observes how often people rely on others to feel significant. But her value no longer comes from being needed, liked, or accepted. She finds power in being self-sufficient, not emotionally isolated, but emotionally stable. This self-sufficiency is not cold. It is clear. It means that when others disappoint her or misunderstand her, she no longer crumbles. She knows who she is even when no one reminds her. She no longer needs to be seen to feel seen. She no longer needs to be followed to feel worth leading her own life. And in that space, she becomes magnetic, not because she's chasing attention, but because she's embodying presence. This confidence shows up in how she carries herself. In the way she enters a room without needing to dominate it, but still changes its energy. In the way she chooses silence over gossip, truth over performance, and purpose over popularity. She is no longer afraid of being alone at the table because she knows what she brings. She no longer hides parts of herself to belong because she's realized the cost of pretending is too high. The more she honors herself, the more she outgrows the need for external affirmation. Her identity is no longer a reaction, it is a declaration. And when she looks in the mirror, she no longer asks if she's enough. She knows, because she has seen herself in the depths, in the quiet, in the trials. She has carried herself through moments that no one applauded. She has faced doubts and kept going. She has shown up for herself again and again. That is where true confidence is born, not from what she shows the world, but from what she builds in the dark. It is the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard, the kind that walks silently but powerfully into every moment. A woman becomes powerful when she no longer seeks permission to grow. For most of her life, she may have been taught to ask, to wait, to be granted space by others before she dares to take up her own. But there comes a time when she realizes that growth is not something anyone else can give her. It is not something she needs to be allowed to have. It is something she must claim for herself. That realization changes everything. She stops waiting for encouragement. She stops seeking a green light from people who never saw her vision in the first place. She stops asking for understanding from those who were never meant to walk her path. Instead, she begins. In the beginning, this can feel uncertain. The world often conditions women to seek approval before making bold moves. It encourages them to consult, to soften, to explain. But the more she listens to her inner voice, the more she sees that her dreams are not up for debate. They are not meant to be watered down to fit someone else's comfort zone. She understands that waiting for permission is a silent surrender, and she has surrendered too many times before. Her truth, her strength, her direction. No more. Growth, she realizes, begins the moment she decides that she is already enough to begin. This shift is internal. It does not come with applause or recognition. It comes with solitude, with decision, with courage. She begins to take action without announcement. She starts building without broadcasting. The need to be seen fades. What remains is the need to become. She pours herself into her work, into her craft, into her body, her mind, her mission, not because someone told her to, but because she knows she must. She is not waiting to be discovered. She is discovering herself, and in doing so, she unlocks a strength that does not require anyone else's permission to exist. When she no longer seeks permission, she begins to create boundaries that protect her evolution. She no longer explains why she is changing, why she is distancing herself, why she no longer entertains what drains her. Growth demands space, and now she claims it. She understands that not everyone will approve of who she is becoming. That discomfort is not a sign to stop. It is a sign that she is no longer shrinking, and when others try to pull her back into old patterns, she no longer bends. She has outgrown the need to be understood by those still committed to misunderstanding her. The woman who no longer seeks permission begins to speak with a different tone. She does not ask if it is okay to be bold, to be intelligent, to be ambitious. She just is. Her words no longer tiptoe, they land. Her presence no longer asks to be accepted. It claims space. She doesn't seek conflict, but she no longer avoids it either. She speaks truth even when her voice shakes. She stands firm even when she is questioned. This is not rebellion, it is reclamation. She is reclaiming the right to grow without apology. In her growth, she discovers that freedom is not just external, it is internal. It is the freedom to evolve beyond who she used to be without guilt. It is the freedom to change her mind, her direction, her standards. She no longer asks if it's okay to let go of relationships that no longer serve her. She no longer hesitates to outgrow environments that feel too small for her vision. She moves forward even when she must walk alone, and though the path may be quieter, it is also clearer. The noise of the world fades as her own voice rises. There are no longer checkpoints where she waits to be told she's ready. She decides when she is ready. She decides what is right. She decides what growth looks like. The world may not always understand a woman who moves like this, but she does not move to be understood. She moves because her spirit demands it. She no longer fears being too much. She fears being less than she is capable of. Her standard is no longer acceptance, it is alignment. Her compass is no longer approval, it is purpose. This transformation cannot be faked. It comes only when a woman goes deep enough within herself to recognize that she is the author of her own story. And once she recognizes that, she stops handing the pen to anyone else. She begins to write her life with conviction, with clarity, with boldness. She grows not to prove anything, but because staying stagnant is no longer an option. Growth becomes a non-negotiable. Her future becomes her responsibility. She honors the woman she is now, while fiercely becoming the woman she was always meant to be. The path of self-mastery begins where dependence ends. For a woman to become whole within herself, she must first recognize the subtle ways she has been conditioned to rely on others, not just for support, but for identity, for validation, for strength. This dependency is not always obvious. It can appear in the way she seeks reassurance before making a decision, in the way she hesitates to speak her truth unless it is echoed by someone else, or in the way she holds herself back so as not to disturb the comfort of others. These patterns are quiet but powerful, and until they are broken, they limit her ability to fully own her life. Self-mastery requires that she step away from the need to be guided by the expectations, opinions, and presence of others. It asks that she trust herself more than she has ever trusted anyone else. When dependence ends, responsibility begins. She can no longer blame circumstances or people for what she lacks. She starts to take ownership of her time, her energy, her choices. She becomes deeply aware that no one is coming to save her, not a partner, not a mentor, not a friend. Her liberation does not arrive in the form of external rescue. It begins the moment she decides to rescue herself. And in that decision, a shift occurs. She stops waiting for perfect conditions to change her life. She begins where she is, with what she has, and she commits to becoming more. Day by day, the process is often uncomfortable, because self-mastery demands confrontation. She must meet her own excuses and see them for what they are. She must examine the stories she's told herself about why she can't, why she's not ready, why she needs someone else to lead the way. Every layer of dependency she peels back exposes a deeper layer of truth. And that truth is sometimes painful. It reveals where she has compromised, where she has settled, where she has given away her power. But in that raw truth also lies possibility. She begins to rebuild from a place of honesty, not illusion. Self-mastery also means discipline. Not the discipline imposed by others, but the kind she chooses for herself. She begins to create structure in her life that supports her vision. She rises early not because someone told her to, but because she has learned to value her time. She trains her body, sharpens her mind, feeds her soul, not for recognition, but because she has decided that she is worth the effort. She is no longer motivated by fear or guilt. Her motivation comes from within. She acts in alignment with her future self, and when setbacks come, as they always do, she does not collapse. She adapts, she endures. She continues. Emotional independence becomes a cornerstone of her growth. She learns to sit with discomfort without rushing to numb it. She holds space for her own emotions without expecting others to carry them for her. She becomes the one who calms her own storms, not because she wants to be distant or detached, but because she understands that her peace must be self-generated. She is not cold, she is clear. She is not unreachable, she is rooted. And in this emotional clarity, she becomes more grounded than ever before. Through this journey, she starts to recognize the difference between solitude and loneliness. What once felt like absence now feels like presence. She is present with herself not as a fallback, but as a priority. She realizes that her energy is sacred, that not everyone deserves access to her. She no longer gives out pieces of herself in exchange for connection. She chooses who enters her space, and more importantly, She chooses how she shows up in the world. Her presence becomes intentional. Her actions become aligned self. Mastery is not about perfection. It is about awareness. It is about the continuous return to center, the daily practice of choosing growth over comfort, clarity over confusion, self-respect over approval. She holds herself accountable not because she is hard on herself, but because she is devoted to her own evolution. She becomes the kind of woman who keeps promises to herself, the kind who doesn't need to be reminded of her goals because she wakes up thinking about them. The kind who leads herself fiercely and faithfully as she walks this path. She begins to feel the difference between power that is borrowed and power that is embodied. Borrowed power needs affirmation, applause, agreement. Embodied power needs none of those things. It radiates from within. It is felt in her silence, in her stillness, in her decisions. She does not move impulsively, but when she moves, it is with purpose. She does not react to every challenge, but when she responds, it is with strength. The woman on the path of self-mastery does not ask the world for permission to rise. She simply rises. Because she has built herself from the inside out, and there is no part of her that she does not claim as her own. The journey of a woman who thrives without friends is not defined by absence, but by awakening. It is a path carved through solitude, silence, and inner confrontation. Along this path, she learns that strength is not given, it is uncovered. She discovers that validation is fleeting, but self-trust is eternal. She stops waiting for someone to recognize her worth and begins embodying it in everything she does. Through solitude, she finds discipline. Through independence, she finds clarity. Through the end of dependency, she finds mastery. And through all of it, she becomes unstoppable. Not because the world gave her power, but because she finally remembered that it was always hers.